Good morning. The next unit that we're going to be covering is going to be cold metal. For the cold metal unit, we're going to be working primarily with sheet metals. But for the cold metal unit, I'd first like to go over these different types of metals that you'd really need to keep in mind. These two different types of metals would have to be a ferrous metal and a non-ferrous metal. Ferrous metals would be any kind of metal that contains iron. So steel and stainless steel would fall under that ferrous metal category. Second, your non-ferrous metals would be anything that does not have iron. So metals like aluminum and copper would fall under that same category of non-ferrous metals. And finally, the last little bit of metals that I would like for you to get familiar with would be alloys. Alloys are mixtures of metals. So any kind of metal, such as brass or bronze, would be considered an alloy. Brass being a mixture of copper and zinc, bronze being a mixture of copper and tin. Now, for another item that I would like for you to be familiar with, especially for this project that we're going to be building, that would be a sheet metal dustpan. You got to be familiar with different gauges of metals. Now, I've covered in previous videos the difference in gauges of wire. Now, much like wire, sheets of metal that would be categorized by gauges is much like that of a shotgun shell, where the lower the number is going to be a thicker metal, as well as that higher number being thinner. So with our sheets of metal being 22 gauge, this sheet of metal is going to be relatively thin. If we were to be using something like a 12 gauge steel or a 10 gauge steel, it'd be very difficult to cut, being that it's a metal that is very thick. So our sheets of metal that we'll be using for our dustpan project are going to be 22 gauge. Additional material that we'll be having for these dustpan projects, along with our sheets of metal, are going to be angle iron, some nuts and bolts, carriage bolts to be exact, as well as some conduit for a handle. Along with the sheets of metal, our angle iron and our additional projects that make up a handle for our dustpan are going to be the tools that we're going to need to get familiar with. Our list of tools that we're going to include are going to be aviation snips, allowing us to be able to cut our sheets of metal, our sheet metal brake in order to bend the metal that you'll see in additional videos, pop rivet tool in order to fasten the metal together, and along with it, layout tools. Now, to be really exact when it comes to your measurements, you can use something like a scribe. A scribe is much like that of a pencil, except this pencil allows us to be able to scratch over our sheets of metal in order to make our mark. However, with this video, the scribe is very hard to actually show. So in a lot of cases, and I recommend this to my students, is that you use a permanent marker. In this case for our dustpan, where since it's only going to be a dustpan, in order for us to be able to see our marks, to see our layouts and our measurements, especially numbering too, we're going to be using a permanent marker. Now, this is going to be, I kind of did a Martha Stewart with this project, and I went ahead and I made my measurements, my marks, as well as the little X's. Now, the X's, I recommend this to anybody that's looking to cut out their sheet of metal. If you're looking to cut out your sheet of metal, mark out the areas that are going to be cut. In previous lessons I've done in my classes, there have been mistakes made by students, of course, where by not making the marks, they accidentally cut out an area that would include a portion of their dustpan, whether it's going to be a safety bend or even a tab. We got to save those different materials. One, so that way our dustpan is not going to be cutting any hands, as well as including tabs in order for the different sides of the dustpan to be fastened to either to another portion of the dustpan. So be sure to mark out the areas that you're going to be cutting out with your aviation snips. In addition to marking out, I also number my different lines. in order for me to follow the instructions and also go in order of the different bends. Notice that my numbers 1, 2, 3, I can be able to go in a order that I can be able to make my bends and not be able to jump out of order, jump out of spots. I could be able to follow a particular set of lines in order to create my dustpan, and I'm not going to be jumping out of order and make a mistake and bending the wrong piece. Otherwise, it makes it a lot more difficult in order to create my dustpan in the end. Along with that, something else I would like to point out is this. With our dustpan, I actually label a T, and you can go even as far as a T, a B, T for top, B for bottom, as well as S for the different sides. That's going to be important when you go to create this dustpan, because this sheet of metal that we have here is going to be a 14-inch by 16-inch. If I were to actually turn my sheet of metal the other direction, I'm going to wind up having a sheet of metal dustpan that's going to be out of alignment, a little wonky. So I'm going to make sure that I actually label the top, the bottom, and the sides of my sheet of metal, so that way I can be able to follow it more accordingly. And of course, in order to kind of speed up the process here and to conclude my video, in the very end, once you've done your layout and you've made your marks, you're going to go ahead and cut out your sheet of metal with your aviation snips. So with the aviation snips, I've cut out my dustpan, and at this point, I'm ready to start using my sheet metal brake in order to bend the safety tabs, bend the different walls of my dustpan, as well as the tabs to fasten my dustpan together. And that will come in a future video. So, in the end, products that you're going to be needing in order to create this dustpan: your sheet of metal, your aviation snips, pop rivet tools, as well as a Scribe, Sharpie, and don't forget that ruler. Ruler's going to come in it's going to be very important, otherwise you're going to be finding yourself with messed up measurements, and so I would rather be a lot more accurate with a ruler in addition to your Sharpie and additional tools for making your dustpan. So to conclude this video, and we'll jump into the shop and actually get to work in making to make our bends for our dustpan. So, till next time.